Welcome back into Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery on Locked On Sports Atlanta. We remind you, head over to YouTube, check out our page there. Put Locked On Sports Atlanta in the browser, subscribe to our channel, give us a like, a review, tell us what you think about the show. You can also follow me on Twitter at JMCH316. We welcome into the program a friend of mine that we get the chance to talk to a lot on my radio show. You can check out her work at AtlantaFalcons.com. She is Tori McElhaney. You can follow her on Twitter at Tori_McElhaney. Tori, thanks so much for spending a few minutes with me on the podcast. New form, a little different format than we normally do. So,
thanks for joining me. I know. I'm really excited. This is very new, but I love it.
Yeah, thanks so much. Let's start with Deion Jones because there's been a lot of chatter about will he be with the roster, this and the other. I'll be honest with you. Even in looking at the money after June 1st and things like that, I just don't see how for this year the Falcons move on from him or that they want to move on from him because I'm not sure Anderson's going to be ready to step right in. What do you think this year, at least, the future of Deion Jones is?
Gosh, I think I'm very conflicted in a way that I don't think I was at. Like, I think if I was asked this question maybe a month and a half ago, I probably would have said like, oh, he'll be on the roster. But now looking at it, I'm like, I don't necessarily know because you go after an inside linebacker in the draft. You do still have Michael Walker. You go and get Rashad Evans. Like, I do think that they're moving some pieces around in that inside linebacker room. And I wonder who, honestly, even though Deion Jones had the year that he did last year, which we all know was not great, I wonder how many teams would be willing to kind of resurrect what Deion Jones once was. And so I think that there are a lot of variables. And I honestly keep going back to, I know like the money is a huge, huge deal and everything, but I keep going back to like Terry Fontenot saying like, yeah, we're going to take it on the chin this year to be in a better position next year. Does that still continue when you're talking about Deion Jones's contract and what that would mean if you were to part ways with him? So I honestly am in the same boat as you. I'm looking at the contract and I'm like, I don't understand like how you can move on from Deion Jones, but like maybe they're looking at something that I'm not, or maybe they are just wanting to take things on the chin this year and just kind of like throw it all up and just burn it up, like burn the salary cap up in order to get to 2023. So I don't know. There's a lot of variables at play here.
You think realistically, though, Deion Jones, the type, I mean, I know a lot of people talked about Nakobe Dean and, why don't we grab him here? But he's a smaller version of Deion Jones, and Deion is struggling in the defense that we have right now. You think Deion is the kind of player that fits that inside linebacker role for what Dean Pease wants to run?
I think that's a good question, and I think that it's really interesting because someone who doesn't fit Dean Pease's scheme is Grady Jarrett. And Grady Jarrett just got a 3-year extension. So I don't necessarily think that it's a scheme fit problem. If there is a problem, I think that it's because when you look at Grady Jarrett, there's a guy who, even going into last year when Dean Pease was coming in, everyone was saying like the reason why Grady Jarrett didn't get a contract extension at this point last year was because he didn't fit the scheme. He didn't fit what Dean Pease was looking for in the interior of the defensive line. Now here we are a year later, and I think it would be safe to say that Dean Pease and the rest of the coaching staff fell in love with Grady Jarrett and who he is as a player and who he is as a person. Can we say the same thing about Deion Jones? Like, if he's not necessarily a scheme fit, are the coaching staff in love with who he is as a player and person in the same way that they are Grady Jarrett? I think that's more of the argument than it is necessarily scheme fit, because Dean Pease has said for so long, even in like even in his days in Baltimore and even in his days with Tennessee, that he very much has to cater his scheme to the players that he has available. And so I think Grady Jarrett's the best example, like that you don't necessarily have to be a quote unquote scheme fit in order to play in Dean Pease's defense. And so I think when you're thinking about the Deion Jones example, kind of refer back to what we just saw with Grady Jarrett and why that works. if that makes sense.
I like the Troy Anderson pick out of Montana State. I know it's a guy that a lot of people don't know much about, but he is a great athlete. I do think, though, that it's going to be a slow work to bring him in. I know a lot of people think, well, second round pick, he should start. And I get that. But I think the transition to the NFL, I think with the way their linebacker core is set up now, they've brought inside, outside guys in that they don't really have to force him into the starting lineup. How do you see his role? I think it could be special teams early on, then work his way in the rotation. But you think he's a guy that they're going to try to push into the starting lineup right away?
I don't think so. I don't think there's that pressure. I know I like what you said. Like everybody thinks, oh, a second round pick, like he has to play immediately. I don't fall into that camp, and I don't necessarily think that this coaching staff does either. Because recently, and I've said this example before, and I don't know where I said it, but Arthur Smith was talking about Richie Grant not too long ago, and Richie Grant's trajectory and how they almost essentially felt like rushed to put Richie Grant on the field, maybe before Richie Grant was even ready because of the injuries sustained in the secondary and kind of how they had to reevaluate things after Isaiah Oliver's injury in week 4. And it's like, I remember Arthur Smith saying, like, Richie Grant didn't fail at what we asked him to do because we asked him to do a whole lot. And it wasn't a part of kind of the original plan for Richie Grant. I honestly, and Richie Grant was a second round pick. I honestly kind of put Troy Anderson in the exact same boat where it's like, there is a plan, there is a trajectory, but it's not going to be one where they throw him out there immediately unless they absolutely have to. And so that's kind of what I think when I think about Troy Anderson and his rookie year. I agree with you. I think he'll be a good special teams player. I think he'll get the reps when and if needed. But I don't foresee him being a full-blown starter just yet. And I think that's okay.
Do you think Arnold Ebiketie is already the best pass rusher on this roster, fair or unfair?
Oh, that's a great question. Gosh, I don't know. I think I would like
back there.
It is. I mean, yeah, it is. I would like to say that Lorenzo Carter, the production that we saw in the last 5 games of this past year, if that's who Lorenzo Carter is, then no. If Lorenzo Carter is like not that guy and that was just a fluke of 5 games, then yes. I think that's where I'm kind of at is like, is Lorenzo Carter, I know Lorenzo Carter's here on a 1-year deal. Is he the guy that we saw at the end of last year?
Right.
Or is he not? I think that answers the question.
I think the other thing too that people are going to have to wrap their arms around, Tori, is evaluating Drake London. And I say that from a standpoint of his production. I mean, you have a quarterback that, let me put it like this, Marcus Mariota's best year in attempts is 150 less passes than Matt Ryan averaged over the last 4 years. It's a big discrepancy about what Marcus Mariota was as a quarterback in the NFL versus what Matt Ryan is a quarterback in the NFL. And I think people immediately, when you have a wide receiver picked at number 8, you're looking at his numbers. Is he 1,000 yards? Is he this? Is he that? But I think people are going to have to sort of adjust their expectations on what his production and value is. I mean, is that a fair statement? I mean, how do you think people are going to look at and have to try to evaluate Drake London this year?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's a great perspective because this offense is going to look different without Matt Ryan. And that's just a fact. And it's not going to be the same level. Like Marcus Mariota is not going to have the same strengths and the same production as Matt Ryan does. He's going to have a different level of production in different areas. I mean, he's more of a running quarterback. He can run the ball. Nothing against Matty Wills, but we know that's not Matt Ryan's strength. So with that being said, I think when you have Marcus Mariota in the backfield with Cordarrelle Patterson, it does change the way you run your offense in a way that it doesn't when Matt Ryan is there with Cordarrelle Patterson. So because of that it simultaneously affects Kyle Pitts and Drake London. I mean, so I think that in terms of just overall production, I know Arthur Smith says this all the time, and I completely agree. Like, stats can be super misleading. I again use the example of Grady Jarrett. I know I'm talking about it a lot, but he's literally the perfect example when talking about all this. He didn't have any production last year. Like, in sack production, like nothing. Like, and it was a really disappointing year on the stat sheet for Grady Jarrett. But if you turn on the film at all, you see he is double teamed and triple teamed consistently. And that in and of itself, I think, is a sign of respect more than maybe stats are. It's a sign of respect across the league that offensive coordinators do not like Grady Jarrett because they have such a respect for him that they got to put 2 and 3 guys on him every single snap. I think that is, when you think about that, it's like Drake London, Kyle Pitts, they can still be doing really good things even if the production isn't there. And so trying to wrap your head around stats don't tell this whole story, I think, is really important going into this year, especially when the offense is going to look so different.
Last question, Tori. They are going to have a little bit of money after you get the draft class signed with the Grady Jarrett moving of money and things like that, lowering his cap number this year. They will have a little bit of money, and they'll keep a little bit probably in reserve, going into the season like most teams do. But where do you think? I mean, they're going to add to the roster. Where do you think priority is going to lie? If you're talking about bringing in 1 or 2 veteran free agents, where do you think that priority is going to lie?
I still think there's room to add someone in both linebacker spots. According to what happens with Deion, I think you could go inside outside. But I think that's both linebacker spots I think are open. I think you could even make the argument that you could bring in anyone on the line of scrimmage, offensive line or defensive line, especially in the interior if you're talking about like guards and centers, and I think that makes sense, even though they did go out and get Justin Schaefer in the draft. I think there's still room to bring in maybe a veteran guard who kind of falls by the wayside this summer sometime. So those positions, I think, are the ones that I would be looking at mainly.
Head over to AtlantaFalcons.com. Check out all of her work there. You can follow her on Twitter at Tori_McElhaney. Tori, thanks so much. Thanks for getting up with me, hanging out for a few minutes. We will chat soon. Radio, podcast, TV. I don't know what we'll be doing, but we'll talk again soon.
We'll do whatever we need to do. We'll do it.
Right, yeah. Thanks, Tori. Appreciate it. It is Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery here on Locked On Sports Atlanta.